Right. Week 4. What are we going to go through? So as I said last week, I'm going to kind of double back on the business model canvas and then some MVP stuff, some minimum viable product stuff, relating to some of the readings this week. And there's a lot on the business model canvas as well, and value proposition design, which I've sort of slotted together. I'll actually put the business model canvas, like the full text, up on Moodle as well, so you can get access to it, so you can see it. It's in the library as well, but I'll just put it up on there so you can actually see the detail, but I'm going to go through a lot of the detail today anyway. And then the last point I'll say is go through is this whole pivot concept. You guys read through that? Yeah? And we can see some of the evolution of MVPs into business models that have pivoted towards more profitable segments or more, a better idea, either in the value proposition in the customer segments or how they all fit together in the business model canvas. Cool. So this is the business model canvas again. Some of these things seem pretty, simple, basic. I think that's the whole idea. The whole idea is to keep it pretty simple. A lot of the feedback for startups around writing a business plan is that you spend all this time writing a business plan, and business plans never survive their first contact with the customer. So the whole philosophy is to get your business plan in contact with the customer as soon as possible. That's the whole philosophy of the lean startup and everything behind it. So Steve Blank then says, well, let's just ditch the concept of a business plan and go with something called a business model. And the business model constantly evolves as you talk to more customers and as you get more data and more feedback around your product. So that's its purpose, essentially. Then two things to consider about business model canvas. The first one is how it's structured, and I'll play the videos back in a second, but I might just talk through these. The value proposition and customer segments are the two most important components of it. And this sort of block just here is essentially what you put out into the world as a business. So your value proposition is what is your product or service. You take it to the customers, to your customer segments through your channels, and they define the relationships that are formed with your different customer segments. Everything else, and then the revenue stream, so basically a value proposition will pass through a revenue stream to a customer segment and then back through. And we'll go through in detail, how they all fit together. Everything else is sort of backroom, stuff that's not seen. So the cost structure, so what kind of cost structure do you have to put in place to actually make the value proposition happen? Usually, if you land on something that works here, whatever it is, then you'll just figure out a way to make these things work. A lot of old sort of corporate business model thinking is business-led. So these things define, so your key partners, your activities, your key resources, and your cost structure define what goes on the front end of your business model. But actually that's, in my opinion, the wrong way to do it. You should always be customer-led. Your customers should define everything in the rest of your canvas, but they should definitely define the types of relationships that you form with them, the way that you actually get your products to them, and the kind of product that you're delivering to them. Because if you do that, you'll actually solve a real problem. Whereas if you start from this end, lots of entrepreneurs do it, I've done it before, you end up building something that you're really good at doing that nobody wants. So you might be absolutely ripping at, writing some very bespoke sort of type of content or, offering some great service, but actually nobody really wants it, or they might want it but in a slightly different way, and you wasted all that time. So this is Alexander Osterwalder, the guy who wrote the business model canvas, so this is a long talk he did at Google. It's quite good. It's obviously very long, but at the 12-minute mark, he sort of gets into explaining the different components, and he uses a media example, which is why I think it's good for us.
To figure out, could you describe business models in a more structured way without making it overcomplicated? Okay? So So we came up with something that we call the business model canvas. And we use the canvas, the word canvas deliberately, because on a canvas you draw something, right? You paint something. Now the analogy to business models is you can paint an existing business model, discuss it, improve it. You have a good discussion because you make it tangible, visual. And when you talk about future business models, it's even more important to make it tangible and visible because we're, by definition, talking about the unknown, what we're going to do, what we're going to invent. So you want to have a language there. So it's very simple. It's a language that allows you to describe, challenge, and ultimately invent business models in a slightly more systematic way than we do until now. And it's about 9 building blocks. So you can describe a business model with 9 building blocks, which are pretty straightforward. Let's go through them very quickly. First one, customer segments, users. All right, if you take a newspaper, what would let's take the Wall Street Journal. What are the key customer segments of the Wall Street Journal? What would you say? Finance. What else? Who else? Readers. Advertisers, right? So you have 2 main groups. All the readers, decision makers, finance people, analysts, and you have the advertisers. It's a so-called double-sided market like Google, right? You have 2 very different segments. And for each segment, you'll have a different value proposition. Just like you have a value proposition for advertisers, and you have a value proposition for people who search. Right? So it's about mapping this out. Then we want to ask ourselves, well, how do these customer segments want to be reached? How do the advertisers want to be reached, or can be reached efficiently, and how do the readers want to be reached? So you start talking about the channels. It's not just distribution channels, it's all the channels, the customer interface, the way you discuss and meet and interact with customers, okay? Then you ask yourself, well, what kind of relationships do I build with customers? Pretty straightforward. If you're a private bank, well, you'll have a personal relationship based on bankers. If you're Google or Amazon, well, you might have a personalized relationship based on systems and algorithms. 2 very different types of relationships that have a consequence on the business model. It can be transactional, it can be long-term, it can be acquisition, it can be retention, right? Different types of relationships. And then you want to ask yourself, well, what are people really willing to pay for? People or companies, your customer segments. What are they willing to pay for and how? Through which revenue streams? Well, take books today, or news. Are people still willing to pay for books and news? Well, maybe. Maybe they're more willing to pay for a device. Maybe there's a cross-subsidy there, right? So we need to ask ourselves, what kind of revenue streams and what kind of pricing mechanisms? Now, that's the value we create, how we deliver, and how we capture the value. Now you want to ask yourself, well, what infrastructure do we need to do that? What kind of key resources? Do I need servers? Do I need intellectual property? Do I need factories? What is it that I really need in terms of assets? And then you want to ask yourself, well, what is it that I really do? What are the most important things that I do in my business model? Is it programming? Is it managing servers? Is it marketing? What are the key things there? The key activities. And then you want to ask yourself, with which partners am I going to work? Because they can leverage my business model. It's not just about doing it yourself or doing it with somebody else. Often, it's about leveraging partners. So if you're Zynga, well, if you build games on Facebook, that's a huge leverage to their business model, right? They probably wouldn't have gotten there if they couldn't piggyback on Facebook, right? And then, once you know the key resources, activities, and partners, very quickly, you can sketch out the cost structure. So 9 pretty simple building blocks. Is any building block there new to you? Of course not. But how many times have you sketched out the business model, for example, for a product, in a holistic way like that? But that's pretty important because a lot of the innovation is happening now in the big picture. Of course, product innovation is still important. Of course, addressing new segments is still important. But some of the most powerful business models, they look at the system, the big picture, all 9 building blocks. So that's the concept. Let's turn it into a tool. Let's take away the clutter and turn it into a canvas, a pre-structured canvas, where we have the 9 building blocks.
I might stop it there. You can go through and watch all of that. It's pretty good. He has a great Strategizer has a great YouTube channel as well, guys. Who Strategizer with a Z has a good YouTube channel with a range of different resources on it as well. If you haven't already discovered that. Cool. So I might go through and talk to each one of the segments. Some of them in more detail than others. As I said, the first 5 are the defining element, and everything else sort of comes up behind those. So from customer segments through to revenue streams. I might ask. So you've had a crack at filling out your canvas already? But you have, yeah? Yeah. Oh, you were just sketching notes on there?
Well, I think what I felt in is wrong.
That's the whole idea, right?
Beginning. I think the value propositions is what I provide to customers.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, it may be the innovations were the solutions you solve the problem of the customers, right? Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, what they actually get. What problem are you solving?
Sorry.
You mean?
Sorry. What I wrote.
Sorry, go on. Sorry, I was just getting my power cord in.
It was to provide international cooperating opportunities for Chinese secondary schools. But I think the correct one is personalized for this block.
Well, because but your idea only works if both parties are participating. You need students and you need schools, right?
Mm.
So it's a two-sided marketplace or a multi-sided marketplace. So you need to deliver value for multiple customer segments.
Yeah.
So actually that's probably just one part of your business model canvas. I'll go through that in a minute. So customer segments. What are customer segments? So within the business model canvas, and I think this is a good definition, basically businesses can serve one or more customer segments. So as I was saying, you might just have one, or you might have more than one. And your business model might rely on multiple customer segments, or you might just serve a range of different ones. And that's called a diversified business model, where you've got multiple products. And they all serve different customers, and it's sort of you don't leverage them. You know, it's not like you're getting efficiency out of multiple segments. But more often than not, you've got multiple segments because they're crucial to make your whole business work. So a segment is a group of customers with similar needs or behaviours. And a segment, to be viable, it has to be profitable. It has to be someone who actually spends money or participates in your market in some way. So it serves a purpose. There are segments in lots of markets that are non-pursuable, people who don't participate in that market enough. Usually that's based on whether they do that thing or they buy that product or service over a certain threshold of frequency. So if I do something, say, in consumer goods, it's usually like once a month. If you buy something once a month, it means that you're probably a profitable customer. That's in like consumer goods, things in the supermarket. Now there's lots of other categories, lots of other purchase intervals, but that's how you define whether a segment is profitable. And a segment is distinct from another. It's a different segment if they require something completely different, so a different value proposition. If they're reached through a different distribution channel, so if you have to get at that person through, say, rather than through online selling, you have to get through a customer segment via a sales force, then they are materially different from the other customer segment. They potentially require different types of relationships, so you have to form a relationship with another type of customer to make them continually buy from you. So the comparison there would be airline travel, business travelers require a different type of relationship to, low-cost travelers. You have to form a relationship, you have to have loyalty programs, you have to have a range of different things with business travelers to make them really value your service in that category. Typically they have different types of profitabilities, so some will be more profitable than others, or some will purchase a lot more but they'll have lower, make less but they'll purchase a lot more volume. And they potentially could be willing to pay for different parts of the actual offer that you're putting forth. So different parts of your value proposition, they might value different aspects. So you might have one customer segment for your whole business, could just be one. But then within that, when you say, all right, well, there are slightly different, behaviors within this customer segment, but I reach them in the same way. The offer isn't dramatically different, but they still behave slightly differently. Then they're called personas. So different personas exist within one customer segment. So for example, my business, one of our big customers is advertising and marketing agencies. That's the customer segment. But within that segment, there are lots of different personas of the slightly different type of agencies that are out there. There might be newswire agencies, so companies like AP and Australian Associated Press and others. They're still agencies, but they're very different in terms of the type of product they offer and the way that they think about their business in comparison to, say, a web design agency that just builds websites. But my value proposition delivers to both of those customers. But the way that I actually communicate with them is slightly different. But I can reach them through the same channels. They have roughly the same profitability to my business model. And they have roughly the same profitability as well. So that's how you do the distinction between customer, like do you really have different customer segments or not? That's how you sort of put it through that filter. The next thing is a value proposition. So value proposition is in raw terms what the service or product that you provide that delivers value to those segments. So you can have multiple different value propositions in the same business model. And I'll go through an example of that. But essentially, the buckets of value proposition, Alexander Osterwalder puts them in these sort of very large groups. There's value propositions that are new, so new needs or wants, when you create like alternate customer behavior based on giving them something different. So the iPhone is a great example of that. Social media is another great example of that. There's performance value proposition. So this product or service is better, faster, cheaper than what's currently available. Paul Graham basically says for that to really be a success, though, it has to be at least 10 times better than what's currently out there. Otherwise, it's just incremental. It's not actually innovation. It's just sort of an incremental improvement. There's customization value proposition. So that's where you take something that might have been standard in the past and make it customized. So like luxury goods. Or you take something that was standard and make it custom in the consumer space. So that's where things like, the whole 3D printing kind of explosion and all of that sort of, customized but mass economic, mass product but customized comes into play. There are value propositions like low touch value business models. So subscription or set and forget services. Like I know it's a sort of slightly strange example, but Rolls-Royce builds all of the engines for planes and they rent them to airline companies. They just rent them based on the hour, and it's sort of like it just takes that whole element of their business out, and they don't have to worry about servicing and engineering and purchasing and renewals and everything. It's just gone, so they can just forget about it, and it removes the presence of a problem for a customer. Other value propositions, there can be value propositions based on design, and design is a hard to understand, hard to articulate piece of value, but it's incredibly important. There's design value propositions based on service or product design optimization. So that's doing something more effectively or in a better way than it's done before based on the design of the product or service. And service design, if you're interested in that, goes forever and ever. There's a range of different resources on service design. And if you're interested in that, just hit me up on Slack. And this design component can be either aesthetic or it can be functional, or it can be both. You could design a better process for a service deliver it more effectively without doing any other innovation around what the product actually is. So it's actually how you bring the product to market might be your innovation based on, service that's currently being done in a really cumbersome way. Or aesthetic, it might just be, that's lots of luxury goods have aesthetic design input into the product. There's obviously price value proposition, we all know about that, and that's a typically low price value proposition. So you have to optimize your business model around being able to deliver a low value proposition, and every part of the puzzle has to fit in place around that low price. Or you could even have free as a business model, and freemium business models are quite prevalent in the media industry, although not as much anymore. There's cost reduction or efficiency business value propositions, so reducing ongoing costs or increasing efficiency. Things like CRM or Salesforce, lots of software products exist in that cost reduction efficiency space. And then accessibility, so off previously unavailable opportunities via a business model innovation. So in the business model canvas, he gives the example of a company that is like leasing, like a timeshare leasing arrangement on corporate jets. So, corporate like private jets. That's an incredibly hard thing to get your hands on if you're just a normal consumer, or say if you're like a business person. But this company has somehow figured out a way that you can sort of timeshare a corporate jet, which is interesting. Another really big one of those is IKEA. They kind of say that their business model is actually bringing high-end design products to the masses. So it's an accessibility value proposition with a bit of design. And then the other one is convenience. So yeah, that's pretty self-explanatory. What I might go through now is the value proposition design component. So this is sort of like an add-on to the business model canvas. It's not something that's required. It's not required for your assignment. So for the first assignment, but if you do want to use it, it is a good way to articulate what your actual value proposition is. So if you're struggling to kind of really get to grips with what the value proposition is, then this might be a good way to really dive into it. So I thought that was a good tool, or it's a good sort of add-on to really get to grips with what that value proposition actually is. And as I said before, like if you've got multiple customer segments, particularly if you've got a multi-sided market, then you'll have one of those for each of your customer segments. So for example, if you're in the media space, you'll have a value proposition for people who are advertising on your site, if you have an advertising model, and you'll have a value proposition for your readers, or your audience. Cool. So let's jump back into the business model canvas. The channels, are simply defined as how you reach, communicate with, and serve your customer segments. And if you have multiple customer segments, you must have multiple channels, because one of the key definitions of a different customer segment is you need to have a different channel to reach them. Not exclusively, some channels might overlap, some customer segments might overlap, but typically there's enough difference, so it means, well, the primary way that I need to communicate with this channel is through a Salesforce, for example, as opposed to, say, advertising. Osterwalder basically says that there's different phases of a channel. So when you're communicating with a customer, a certain customer segment may wrap around these different sort of phases that a customer might be in. This is extremely basic kind of customer journey mapping in a way. Your customer journey just being, the relationship stages they go through as they develop and purchase and then have an ongoing relationship with your business. Purchase from you and have a relationship. So that's all that means. Basically, people find out about you at the awareness stage. That's typically through a channel, might be the same channel all the way along, could be a different channel. They evaluate your proposition. That could be multiple interactions. It could be actually through research. It could be through talking to a salesperson. It could be anything. They then purchase, and that specific purchase is typically the most important channel. So where they purchase is typically your most important channel for that customer segment. So e-commerce, it's usually the website. How do they actually get your product? So delivery mechanism, could be the same channel, could be a different channel. And then after sales and ongoing relationships. So what kind of ongoing relationship do you maintain with your different customer segments, and what channel do you use to actually do that? So a channel can be all of the ones I've got over there. So there's ones that you own and there's ones that you don't own. So if you've got, in your business model canvas, if you've got a channel that's basically an indirect one, so a partner channel, it means that you then also have a key partner that you need to put into your business model canvas. So for example, in my business, one component of our tech platform is integration with social media networks. And so one of my key partners are social media networks. If I want my platform to be strong, I need them to be on board with my platform. Similarly, if one of your distribution channels in a media context, one of your distribution channels is one or all of the social networks, because that's the way that you distribute your content to your end customer, to your end user, which is your audience, then they would be in this schematic. So the way that you actually distribute your content is a key channel to a specific customer segment. So if you know that one of your key customer segments is young women aged 18 to 24, then the channel that you need to basically distribute your content to get it to that customer segment needs to be defined here for a specific reason. So it needs to be based on research. Obviously, this customer segment's more likely to participate in this social network, and therefore I can distribute my content to them in a more efficient and effective way through this channel. And then relationships. So this one's quite interesting. So customer relationships sounds pretty basic, and it kind of is, but then it can get a bit more nuanced the more you get into it, particularly in the media space. So customer relationships basically define the relationship you have to have with your segments. If I skip to the bottom point there, it's not they pay me money or they read my stuff. Like if that's what you're writing there, you're failing, because that's a given. You put the relationships in here need to be the type of relationship you have to have with a customer to make your business model work. So for example, co-creation of content is crucial for any user-generated content business model. Tumblr doesn't work unless the community co-creates the content with them or creates the content. Any social media network, for example, functions in that way. Or Tiger Air, which is a really low-cost airline in Australia owned by Singapore Airlines. There's loads around. AirAsia is exactly the same. They have to have a low-touch, impersonal relationship with their customers to make their business model work, because they can't afford to have a high-touch, concierge relationship with their customers because their cost model doesn't allow for it. So if the customer segment that they're targeting won't accept that kind of relationship, then the whole business model breaks. So that's why it has to be defined by the relationships that make your business model work, not just they love me. That's not they love what I do. And like, well, that doesn't make any sense. It has to be something tangible related to the profitability of your business or the structure or the way that it's actually executed. Now, Steve Blank kind of builds on top of this and he says, well, that's great, that basic definition is great, but then he goes a bit further and says, well, this is actually how you sort of